Sheriff, I want to give you a chance because a lot of our talk has been focused on the city, but we saw that protest come right to your doorstep in Harford County. And I guess I have two questions. One, talk to me about what your force learned through that. And two, how do you approach it in an area? And these are stats, they might be old, so you have to correct me. I think you're about 76% white, 13% black, 14% Hispanic in Harford County. So the messaging might be a little different in the county. I think, is some education happening there, do you think?
Yeah, definitely, and we did see, and everyone who watched the video of Mr. Floyd dying on the street in Minneapolis, were rightfully upset. And what we saw there was not an example of good police work, and people. I think there's a disconnect between a lot of the young people or a lot of the people who think that they're advocating for Mr. Floyd and the police, where the police think that was an example of good police work. I spoke to every one of our roll calls here at the sheriff's office, along with my chief deputy, and we asked that very question. And no one thinks that what they saw there was good police work or an example of good police work. And rightfully, people were outraged at what they saw and directed that toward police. And so much of that group was the young people. Our county, the demographics are actually about 86% white and about 13% black, and then other Hispanic with Asian population. But a lot of the people who turned out were the young white people who again were rightfully upset with what they saw. Directed at police departments across the country, and I think in some part largely unfair because so many police officers and police departments go out there every single day, the men and women of law enforcement, with the best interest of the community. You heard Daniel talk about the violent cycle of crime in Baltimore City. So many men and women in the city police force, and Mr. Scott, very likely going to be the mayor very shortly, has this to inherit and try to change this direction, this cycle of violence that comes back. The police officers down there, for the most part, are trying to assist with that. I think police have been asked to do too much over the years. We have to bring other solutions to the problem, just like with the drug. The war on drugs, you're not going to wrest your way out of the violence that's in the city or other places around our country. We're going to have to work with all of our community partners and, most importantly, that community, our community members, to change the direction. And the same in Harford here as in Baltimore. Our problems may not be as large, but we still have them.
President Ferguson, when it comes to solutions, tell me about how much the needle is moved by the young activism that you've seen and what you can do there as far as allocating money to ensure that some of the needs that young people may want to succeed actually become a reality.
To the needle moved. I think we still have a long way to go. We have a really long way to go. I think that there is a greater level of recognition of the problem. I think that the solutions have been less clear as to how to have systemic change that is lasting. What we've seen sort of in the most recent unrest, I think in Baltimore was a bit different than it was 5 years ago. The level, the frustration is still the same, though. And I think you don't get to that level of anger and frustration and emotion and just fear for the future if it weren't real. And I think that's what I think the young people on the streets have been best able to do is they're not sort of burdened down by the structures and the concerns about alternatives, and they just see something that's wrong and they call it out. And so I think it's up to us to respect that by responding with solutions. And I think that's what we're in the face of trying to do now. And it's no easy task. I mean, there is no switch to flip to say, we've now solved this problem. This is deep and it's systemic and it's cultural and we have so much work to do. And I think the pressure is going to be necessary because this is an ongoing body of work.
Aaron and Brittany, I saved you for last because I consider you to be sort of the OGs in this whole movement because I think a lot of the young people look at what you've done. Hey, that's not a call on your age, my friend. It's all wisdom. It's all wisdom. And I'm just curious of what you've taught young people to get the kind of mentality that President Ferguson is talking about. They've squashed what they hear from some of us older folks, and they've paved their own path. But I'm guessing it's from what you've shown them, the both of you. Brittany, I'll let you go first. Ladies first.
Well, I think it's really what Daniel was saying. You know, I appreciate him, his voice, his courage, being a part of a larger movement. And that's really the, you know, the structure of science is we don't have time to focus on all the traumatic events. We instead have time to focus on all the brilliance of people like Daniel and everyone on this phone call instead in Baltimore. And I think him just being an ambassador, right, as we know, is one thing to make kids or young adults do something, but it's something else to change their mindset so they can keep empowering themselves and grow more people. And I think that's the most important part of what we've been doing, me, Aaron, or even if it's Erica, is giving that voice, but then also showing and making sure they're unapologetic and exercising their voice. And we know protesting can look in many different forms. So it's just how we're making sure that we give the tools and the access that we didn't have growing up so that people can continue the legacy, build, undo the racism, undo the policy issues, because it won't just end with my lifetime or probably even Daniel's. It's a long fight because it was waged before us. So I think it's just that, just really listening, because that's always the hardest thing for people to do, then getting tools to keep guiding and not being afraid to say, I learned from younger kids because you said I'm old. But you know, we're always learning too how we can be better advocates to analyze the needle.
Go ahead, Aaron.
I agree. I agree with everything the sis just said. I'm learning from Daniel as we're speaking. I learn from my students. I learn from my teams. I think that one of us ideas, not just me, but Brittany and Erica and other leaders of organizations that are trying to do the real grassroots work here, is we understand that we're serving first and foremost. You know what I mean? Like, we're serving our community, we're serving our youth, and in order to serve, you have to understand that there is an exchange that takes place.
Mm-hmm.
You're educating, you should also be learning. As you're teaching, you should also be getting sewn into by your students as you're pouring into them. So one of the things that I try to make sure that I do from not just the education standpoint, but a grassroots standpoint, is understand that I'm not the leader or the head of what it is that we're doing. This movement needs to be determined by the people. And just because I'm a voice, it doesn't mean I'm the voice. And if I'm not plugged in and I'm not listening and I'm not exchanging ideas with people on the ground and in the boardrooms and in the courtrooms and in the rooms where legislative policy gets decided upon, then I'm not really qualified to speak on it. So I think 2 points that are really that is really important that we do make here, though. I heard what Sheriff said about the whole difference in dynamics of a city like Baltimore as opposed to Harford County, and kind of the protest. A lot of the people there maybe letting their voices be heard on something that necessarily take place there. But during a time such as this, when we're looking at this transformative conversation yet again of policing in our community, what should it look like? What should it entail? One of the things I think that is leading to some of the expediency that we're seeing in these things being addressed from a legislative policy level is the fact that all across the country, all across the world, people, whether they're the victims of state-sanctioned violence or not, are finally standing up and saying something that is a problem in the most marginalized community. And even if that's not an experience that I had firsthand, incumbent upon us as the people of this country, hold our municipalities for the things that have happened and say that going forward, we want to re-examine and re-evaluate what this relationship between policing and the communities in which they serve should look like. And from a legislative policy standpoint, like Mr. Ferguson was referring to, there are certain things that we do know don't work. You know what I mean? And, continuing to pour money into a system that we know is not serving the community the way the community needs to be served is not the answer. I think that we can all come to that conclusion and say that that's a reasonable assertion. So how do we now just do what's necessary to get all of the voices at the table that need to be there to start to have the conversation about reimagining what policing in America and in Baltimore City needs to look like? So I think that we do know that if we're investing in solutions, if we're investing in community-based, grassroots-centered initiatives that are already doing the work, that has exposed Daniel to this fight, has exposed students like Brittany's and mine to this fight, then why get all of these people together and start to frame out what our society should look like, what organizations should be poured into, and how do we give them the bandwidth and the framework to be able to do the real grassroots-based work that will lead to the solutions taking place, because just arresting people and locking people up is not going to change the root causes of the problem.